There was once a kingdom, ancient and vast, veiled in mist and memory. The people called it Edenmar, for they believed it was the land where heaven once kissed the earth. But the land was fractured, not by war, not by famine, but by something deeper, hidden in the hearts of its people. Long ago, a storm had passed through the soul of Edenmar. It was not wind nor rain, but sorrow, trauma, betrayal. Generation after generation bore silent wounds, inherited pain, and unspoken shame. The palace walls still stood tall, but within them the rulers were broken. The peasants sang songs of lament. The children played in shadows they didn't understand. In the heart of the city stood a temple, once filled with praise, now dim and hollow. Incense no longer burned on its altars. The priests had grown silent, as though waiting for a word that never came. The people prayed, but the heavens did not speak, until one night, a cold wind howled through the trees, and a forgotten scroll blew in through the temple doors. It stopped at the feet of an old priest named Elian. His beard was white as snow, and his eyes bore the weight of decades. When he picked up the scroll, the seal glowed, not with fire, but with light, the light of remembrance. As he unrolled the scroll, a voice filled the temple. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted bowed. Isaiah 61:1. Elian fell to his knees. The word had returned. The silence was broken. The time had come. The story of Elian begins. Elian was once a warrior. Before the robes of a priest, he wore the armor of a commander. But a battle long ago shattered his spirit, not from defeat, but from betrayal. He had trusted his king, and the king had forsaken him. That day, Elian buried his sword and his voice. He turned to God in solitude. But now the scroll whispered something new. They will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. Isaiah 61:4. This was not just a message, it was a call to rise. And so Elian began a journey, not with weapons, but with words, not to conquer, but to heal. He set out from the temple with the scroll and the scriptures, seeking those whose hearts were in ruins, the broken dwellers of Edenmar. The woman by the river, Elian's first stop, was the river city of Shalem, a place known for beauty and for silence. Along the banks, he met a woman named Mira. She had once been a singer in the king's courts. Her voice was like morning dew, soft, pure, full of joy. But Mira no longer sang. Years ago, she had been deceived by a nobleman who swore love only to disgrace her. When her shame became public, she was cast out. Stones were thrown, not at her body, but at her soul. Her hands were now calloused from washing garments by the river, but her eyes still wept when the wind carried the sound of music. Elian sat beside her, and without speaking, unrolled the scroll. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Psalm 147:3. Mira looked at him, her lips trembling. Why would he come for me? Elian whispered, because your wounds are not wasted, because the God who made the river sees every tear that falls into it. And for the first time in years, Mira sang, not loudly, not perfectly, but gently, like a prayer reborn. Her voice rose with the river's current. It was not just her song, it was healing. The warrior in the wasteland. Far beyond Shalem, Elian journeyed into the barren highlands, a land once called Jarel. now scorched and deserted. There he met Theron, a man with a scarred face and a limp in his gait. Theron had led armies. He had spilled blood for the kingdom, but in one great war, he lost everything: his men, his family, his purpose. He lived among the ruins, haunted by the faces of those he could not save. His hands trembled, not from age, but from memory. Elian approached him with no fear. "What do you want, priest?" "I came to remind you that the battle was never the end." Theron scoffed. "Tell that to the dead." Elian opened the scroll. "I will repay you for the years the locusts have eaten." Joel 2:25. And Theron broke. He fell to his knees, weeping like a child. Elian touched his shoulder. "There is still breath in you, Theron, and where there is breath, there is restoration." The echoing truth as Elian walked through Edenmar, village by village, heart by heart, the scroll burned brighter. Every verse, every word spoken, seemed to awaken something ancient and powerful. The word was alive, and with every story, every healing, Edenmar remembered its name. The kingdom was not doomed, it was recovering. From Mira's song to Theron's tears, from ashes to oil, from shame to beauty, the stories grew like vines over broken walls. And slowly, restoration began. As the sun set behind the mountains, Elian stood once more at the temple's doors. Behind him, a people beginning to believe again. In his hands, the scroll. He looked to the heavens and whispered, "There are memories. You see, Lord, but you do not turn away. You redeem them. You restore us. You rebuild us." And the voice returned, not from the scroll, but from the sky itself. "You will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord, for the display of his splendor." Isaiah 61:3. In the stillness of a palace courtyard, the shadows were heavy, not just from the architecture of stone and cedar, but from the unspeakable weight of what had occurred within those walls. Tamar, the daughter of King David, walked quietly through the inner chambers, her linen robe trailing softly on the marble floor. She was once full of light, her eyes hopeful, her hands always weaving garments of color for the women in the royal household. But after that day, the day her half-brother Amnon deceived her, lured her, and destroyed her innocence, something in her spirit unraveled. She tore her robe, the symbol of purity, and laid ashes on her head. She didn't scream when it happened. The scream came after. It came in the form of silence, a deep, aching silence that spread through the halls like smoke. When pain is hidden behind royal walls, David knew, her father knew, and yet he said nothing. The kingdom said nothing. And in that silence, Tamar's grief grew roots. She remained desolate in her brother Absalom's house, not because she was cast out, but because she no longer knew where she belonged. You see, this is the quiet kind of trauma, the kind that hides behind gold and glory, behind titles and holy songs, the kind that says, "You must be fine, you're from a good family." But even in this silence, even in her heartbreak, God was not absent, for he is the God who sees the silenced. He is the God who counts the tears no one else sees. He is the God who does not forget the Tamar in you. A whisper in the wilderness. Years later, Tamar's name would be whispered by the prophets. Her pain echoed through the Psalms, through the raw cries of David when his kingdom crumbled because of what he chose not to confront. Psalm 147:3 says he heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds, and it wasn't just about the physical wound, It was about the wound of being unheard, unseen, unloved. Tamar's story became a mirror for generations of women and men whose dignity was taken, whose voices were ignored. But the Lord, oh, the Lord is a righteous judge. God's justice never sleeps. Absalom, Tamar's full brother, would rise years later, not just out of pride but fury. He would plot against Amnon, not just as a brother, but as one who burned with vengeance for his sister. But the cycle of revenge did not heal the wound, it deepened the brokenness of David's house. This is what unresolved pain does. It festers, it infects lineage, and unless it's laid at the feet of the healer, it destroys even the most anointed. Yet in all of this, God never turned away. Even as the house of David tore itself apart, God was orchestrating redemption through bloodlines, through heartbreak, through stories that would echo all the way to a manger in Bethlehem. From Tamar's family line came Jesus. Your pain is not the end of the story. Let that sink in for a moment. A story that began in silence and shame was not the end. God took the broken thread and wove it into his greatest redemptive masterpiece. That is who he is. Isaiah 61:7 promises, "Instead of your shame, you shall have double honor, and instead of confusion, they shall rejoice in their portion." Beloved, if you have ever been Tamar, if you carry wounds no one sees, if your story was interrupted by betrayal, abandonment, or injustice, know this: God sees, God remembers, and God redeems. This is not a palace. It is not a battlefield. It is not a throne room. It is a cave, and it is here, in the cave of Adullam, that David, God's anointed king, the giant slayer of Israel, breaks. We often remember David for his victory over Goliath, for the songs sung about him in the streets, for the crown he eventually wore. But rarely do we talk about the moment the future king was hiding underground, his soul unraveling in the shadows. From fame to fugitive, David had once been the rising star, the hero of the people, the beloved of God. But after jealousy rose in Saul's heart, everything changed. He lost his position, his best friend Jonathan, his place at the king's table, his safety, his sense of purpose. He became a fugitive, hunted, homeless, heartsick. And in the cave, his prayers were not bold. They were broken. They sounded like Psalm 142, a cry birthed from this very place. I cry aloud to the Lord. I lift up my voice to the Lord for mercy. I pour out before him my complaint. Before him I tell my trouble. When the mighty become miserable, David wasn't alone in that cave. Scripture says that everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to him. This was not a kingly army, it was a congregation of the crushed, a family of the forgotten. But here's the miracle: that cave became a sanctuary, not because it was beautiful, not because it was comfortable, but because God was there. It was here that God began the real work of preparing David for the throne, not through glory, but through grief, not through applause, but through agony, not through victory, but through vulnerability. The cave is not the coffin. You may feel like you're in your own cave, a place where the world has turned its back on you, where dreams seem distant, where everything you thought God promised feels like it's slipping away. But hear this: the cave is not your end. It is a womb, not a tomb, a place where God deconstructs your pride and rebuilds your purpose, where you meet him not as a warrior with a sword, but as a child with a cry. Psalm 34:18 says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." This is not the verse David quoted when he felt strong. This was his oxygen when he could barely breathe. What God does with broken men, David would one day rise from that cave and lead a mighty kingdom, but he would never forget Adullam. He would never forget what it feels like to be shattered, and maybe that's why he ruled with such passion, such poetry, such desperate dependence on God, because only those who have been in the cave can recognize the pain of others still trapped inside. Only those who have broken can truly carry the heart of the brokenhearted. A voice whispers from the shadows, "He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion." Philippians 1:6. The night was still, not quiet, no. The silence was too heavy to be peace. It was the kind of stillness that came after a storm, when the air still smelled of rain and earth, and the clouds lingered like watchmen over the land. A single campfire flickered in the valley below. There sat a man, cloaked in wool and dust, his hands trembling not from the cold, but from the memories that haunted him, the kind of memories that never truly die. They just sleep, waiting for the right hour to awaken. His name was Eliab, and his story was one of betrayal. The weight he carried. Years ago, before the shadows settled in his heart, Eliab had been a commander in the king's army, trusted, honored, respected. But war had a way of twisting even the noblest hearts. In the heat of battle, Eliab had made a choice, one that saved the kingdom but cost the lives of men who trusted him. The faces of those men, friends, brothers in arms, never left him. He saw them in his sleep. He heard their voices in the wind. He thought that with enough time, the weight would lessen. But the truth, time does not heal all wounds, especially the ones you refuse to bring before God. The meeting in the wilderness. Eliab wandered far from the city, into the barren lands, to hide from the whispers of his own conscience. It was there, under the shadow of the crags, that he met an old prophet. The man looked ancient, his hair like threads of silver, his eyes piercing as though they could see straight into the soul. He did not ask Eliab for his name. He did not ask for his story. Instead, he said, "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Psalm 34:18. Eliab froze. How could this stranger know the storm raging inside him? The prophet continued, his voice low but unshakable. "You carry your past as if it were your cross to bear for eternity, but the weight was never yours to carry alone." The moment of breaking. That night, Eliab could not sleep. He knelt in the dust, staring at the fire's embers until they became the faces of the men he had lost. He spoke into the darkness. "Lord, I cannot undo what I have done. I cannot bring them back. I cannot make it right." And in the stillness, it was as though God himself whispered back, "You cannot, but I can." Tears fell, unrestrained. For the first time in years, Eliab let himself weep, not as a soldier, not as a commander, but as a broken man before his Maker. The release at dawn. Eliab rose. The valley looked different, not because the mountains had moved, but because the weight on his shoulders had. The prophet was gone, but his words remained. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Psalm 147:3. Eliab understood now. God's healing was not about erasing the past, it was about redeeming it. The night had deepened, and the stars scattered above Jerusalem glimmered like the watchful eyes of angels. The streets were quieter now. save for the occasional call of a night watchman or the soft shuffle of footsteps on worn stone. In the upper room where Eliab sat, a single oil lamp burned low, its flame swaying as if dancing with his restless thoughts. He had thought that confessing his sin would bring immediate relief. Instead, it was as though his confession had pulled back a veil, exposing wounds he had kept hidden for years. He felt naked before God, not only for his recent failure, but for a lifetime of mistakes he had buried under layers of busyness and bravado. The scriptures spoke often of God's mercy, but tonight Eliab's heart wrestled with the question, could mercy reach this far? Could the Holy One truly forgive a man who had not only stumbled, but had done so knowingly? In the flicker of the lamp, his eyes fell upon an old scroll lying near the corner of the room. It was worn from years of use, its edges frayed, but as he opened it, his hands trembled. His eyes landed on the words of Psalm 32. Blessed is the one whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Blessed is the man against whom the Lord counts no iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit. He stopped, reading the verses again and again, letting each syllable roll over him like a gentle wave. There was no deceit left in him now. He had laid everything bare before God. Could this be the very doorway into blessing? Suddenly, memories rose within him, not the sins this time, but the moments of God's faithfulness. The time his child had been gravely ill and the fever had lifted after days of prayer. The season of famine when food had somehow appeared at his doorstep. The countless mornings when the sunrise had been a reminder that life in all its complexity was still a gift. And there, in that quiet room, Eliab whispered, not with the force of a man demanding an answer, but with the fragile voice of one daring to hope again. Cover me, Lord, not with shadows, but with your mercy. The words lingered in the air, and with them came a stillness unlike any he had felt in days. The heavy weight pressing on his chest loosened, if only slightly, and deep within, a small seed of peace began to take root. The first night after the return felt both familiar and foreign. The campfires burned as they always had, casting flickers of orange against the darkened stones. But for many, the glow could not reach the shadows lodged deep within their hearts. Eliab lay awake, staring into the embers. He heard the gentle breathing of his wife beside him, the soft rustle of the tent in the night wind. Yet his soul churned restlessly. He had returned to the land of his fathers, but he was not the same man who had left. The memories clung like burrs to his spirit. The long march in chains, the jeers of foreign soldiers, the bitter taste of Babylonian dust. He remembered the day he had been separated from his brother Josiah, sold to a distant household. He never saw him again. Now, in the stillness, those images rose up uninvited. The joy of return was real, but so was the ache of what had been lost. Eliab whispered into the night, Lord, you have brought me back, but my heart is still far from peace. A voice seemed to echo in his spirit, not with the sound of human words, but with the weight of truth. I heal the brokenhearted and bind up their wounds. Psalm 147:3. Eliab closed his eyes, letting the promise settle over him like a blanket. Healing was not instant, he realized. Restoration was not just the rebuilding of walls, it was the slow mending of the soul. Across the camp, another man wrestled with his own torment. Malach, once a stonecutter in Jerusalem, now stood before the half-finished foundation of what would be the temple. His hands, scarred and calloused, gripped a chisel. Years in captivity had hardened him, not just his muscles, but his heart. In Babylon, he had learned to survive by closing himself off, by trusting no one, by burying his hope deep where no enemy could find it. Now he was free, yet strangely afraid. As he shaped the stone, he thought of the prophet's words from earlier that week. The glory of this latter house shall be greater than the former. Haggai 2:9. Malach almost scoffed. How could anything surpass what they had lost? The Temple of Solomon had been magnificent, gold gleaming in the sun, its courts filled with singing. This was rubble and weary hands, and yet somewhere deep within, a question pressed against his doubt. What if God's glory is not bound by stone? What if it is something he builds in hearts broken open? Malach paused, set down his chisel, and whispered, "Then, Lord, start with mine." Far beyond the walls of Jerusalem, news of the return had reached the ears of those who had remained in the land during the exile. Not everyone welcomed the exiles back with open arms. Some feared they would reclaim lands, disrupt the fragile balance of life. And so tension brewed, quiet for now, but simmering. In the prophet Ezra's tent, candlelight danced against scrolls of the law. He had been reading late into the night, tracing the promises God had made to his people. His eyes were tired, but his spirit was restless. He knew this restoration was not just about rebuilding a city, it was about renewing a covenant. Lord, Ezra prayed softly, your people have returned, but will they return to you? The wind outside seemed to stir an answer, rustling the parchment, as if reminding him of the words of Isaiah, I will restore to you the years that the swarming locust has eaten. Joel 2:25. Ezra knew this promise was not a passive one. It required hearts ready to yield, hands willing to obey, and faith willing to endure. And so, beneath the surface of the joy of return, there ran an undercurrent, the fractures of trauma, the weight of memory, and the silent question, could a people truly be whole again? The answer, though distant, was already on its way. For God was not finished with them, and his restoration always runs deeper than the eye can see. The wind whistled through the ruins of what had once been a proud city. The gates, once lined with cedar beams and brass fittings, now hung in splintered fragments. Stones that had formed the city wall lay scattered, their protective circle broken. It was not just the city that was in ruins, it was the hearts of its people. They had once walked in confidence, knowing the Lord was their shield, but over time, they let the cracks in their faith grow wider. A little compromise here, a little neglect there, and soon the enemy walked in without even breaking the gates. Many of us stand among those same ruins today. Maybe it is not a city of stone that has crumbled, but a marriage, a friendship, a calling, or the peace in your mind, and you look around at the rubble and ask, can this be rebuilt? The Lord speaks through the prophet Isaiah. Your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called repairer of broken walls, restorer of streets with dwellings. Isaiah 58:12. This is not just a promise, it is an identity. God does not simply restore you so you can admire the ruins of the past. He rebuilds so you can live again, so his glory can be seen through your story. The work will be slow, just like Nehemiah's people. You may have to rebuild with one hand while holding a sword in the other. The enemy will not sit quietly while you restore what God gave you. He will whisper, it's too late, you're too far gone, but you must answer as Nehemiah did. I am carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Nehemiah 6:3. Every stone you lift in faith is an act of defiance against the past. Every prayer you speak over the ruins pushes back the darkness. And one day you will walk those rebuilt streets, not as a prisoner of the past, but as a testimony of the God who makes all things new. For the one who promised, I will restore the years the locusts have eaten, Joel 2:25, is faithful, and in his hands nothing is beyond repair.